I'm sorry.
Inside Out. Pixar. Is it malicious here? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you can pull it. Maybe you can pull it here, you can. Yeah, it's fine, yeah.
They asked me, could I come up here for 8 a.m. on Saturday morning? Are you kidding? I probably will be grading all weekend. That's what I do. I don't have a life. My family is abandoned me. Come up at 8 a.m.
I spent like 5 minutes on it. He has his pair of these. He has his pair of these on.
It's April. Yeah, I'm gonna watch this.
It just they wouldn't. Yeah. Alex, are you nervous?
Yeah, slightly.
Hey, it's okay. So we're all done.
Okay.
Callie coming back? I saw her full time.
I hear you.
There she is. I wasn't going to start without you. I knew you wanted to be here. Welcome, everyone, to day 8. Is that a statement or a question? Our senior honors thesis defenses. It's day 9.
It's day 9.
Day 9. Wow. Yeah, time flies. We will be continuing the defenses, taking a day off tomorrow. Monday and Tuesday we'll close out the defenses. Today we have it's mail day. Okay, we've got Aaron coming up at 4 o'clock. Alex here at 3:15. 2 outstanding projects. Again, it's been a joy to work with these guys this year. Really timely topics with lone wolf terrorism coming up at 4, and of course AI and the non-state and state actors and regarding this. And again, it's been a joy to work with Alex this year. Great committee, by the way, awesome committee this year. We were just talking about that before you guys arrived. Again, I'm glad to have a good turnout, thesis students as well as some audience members. I think you're really going to enjoy this presentation. Let's give it up for Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Toppich. Hello, my name is Alex Anka, and welcome to my thesis defense. My thesis title is The Malicious Use of Artificial Intelligence, How State and Non-State Actors Project Influence. In 2020, artificial intelligence company OpenAI introduced GPT-3, an artificial intelligence text generation model. Despite being named OpenAI, at first this model was not available to the general public because of its ability to generate harmful text that was both untruthful and instigating. Also, because the training data had been collected from the internet, GPT-3 perpetuates societal biases and creates toxic language. Now, GPT-3 exists under a broad definition of artificial intelligence, which is the ability of a program to collect data, make reasoned decisions on such data, and act accordingly. This artificial intelligence can be used in a malicious way that harms the general public physically and psychologically. It's important to note that AI is a tool that actors can use to promote harm. AI is not intrinsically good or bad of itself. Actors use artificial intelligence in a myriad of ways, from lethal autonomous weapons that process data in real time and autonomously fire, to AI that intentionally manipulates social media users online. AI's main advantage is that its processing speed is much greater than that of the human brain, and while training of AI requires large amounts of computing power, it can be run on relatively small machines. To cover the broad way in which private and public entities misuse artificial intelligence, I chose 3 case studies for this topic: China, Russia, and non-state actors. Let's hop into the first one. China's primary use of artificial intelligence is to surveil its citizens, particularly its Uyghur population. It collects data and unethically imprisons its population. According to the Xinjiang Victims Database, 47,350 people have been placed in detention as of November 30th, 2022. With more rapid artificial intelligence development and experimentation on the Uyghur population, the number of detainees will increase, and the only byproduct of the human rights violations committed by China will be its extended influence both domestically and abroad. Now, China is a highly influential actor in both the artificial intelligence space and general political sphere, and it aims to be the greatest actor through its plan for AI innovation, called its Artificial Intelligence Development Plan, AIDP. This plan designates 3 key years for artificial intelligence innovation. By 2020, China hopes to maintain competitiveness with other powers and optimize its AI development capabilities. This has been achieved. By 2025, to achieve a major AI breakthrough that allows it to become world-leading in some applications, as well as a leader in artificial intelligence ethics. We will see why ethics are important in a bit. And finally, by 2030, to become the world's innovation center for AI. To accomplish its AIDP goals, China has elevated 5 of its top private companies to receive government funding and support: Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, iFlyTech, and SenseTime. But for the purposes of this presentation, I will only talk about the 2 most important companies, Alibaba and SenseTime. Alibaba is China's online retailer, similar to Amazon in both its function and size. Alipay, a subsection of Alibaba that uses online payment services, received privacy certification from the Chinese government in June 2018. This represents another point of data collection for the Chinese government and private companies. Data can be collected by Alibaba on what users buy, and the data can easily be used maliciously, such as tracking when Uyghur Muslims purchase necessities for prayer and targeting individuals accordingly. Alibaba's Alice Mind natural language processing technology has also surpassed human natural language processing benchmarks, meaning that its ability to understand language surpasses that of human intelligence. By using this technology to track messages sent through text or online, China can monitor its citizens and the emotions and ideas communicated interpersonally. The other company I'm talking about today is SenseTime. China's SenseTime is the most valuable artificial intelligence company in the world, and its flagship product, SenseFoundry 1.0, created in 2018, is capable of facial recognition, vehicle recognition, passenger recognition, crowd analysis, and event detection. All of these tasks can be coordinated with the Chinese government to, for example, detect and prevent riots or protests before they even occur. The facial recognition attached to this technology is highly effective. SenseTime has also boasted that the facial recognition associated can detect faces accurately even with masks. By surpassing some traditional methods of avoiding facial recognition, citizens in China will have to come up with new solutions to face their diminishing privacy. In 2022, China had 550 million cameras, roughly 1 camera for every other person at the time. This allows China to gather more data than any other US counterpart and surveil its citizens. In this image, a camera finds individuals who violate laws and shames them publicly on digital billboards. These cameras make up China's city brain. It's technology that controls everything from red light timing and sensors on trash cans to the autonomous surveillance of all of its citizens through methods such as spy bird drones disguised as doves that float overhead. Part of the city brain tech is used to surveil the Uyghur population, such as apps within phones that hunt for Quran verses or Arabic script in images, and citywide algorithms that can detect anomalous behavior, whether they leave their homes through a different door, spend less time talking online or talking to neighbors, or use unusual amounts of electricity. All data collected on the Uyghur population is used to train more artificial intelligence algorithms, which are then used on the general public of China. However, despite this, China is currently failing to address its weaknesses in artificial intelligence innovation. On the hardware side, China's semiconductor technology is widely produced, but falls short of other global manufacturers in quality. Its reliance on Western chips is staggering. Over 90% of the chips imported are directly imported from Taiwan. As China innovates in artificial intelligence as well, the gap between the lower and upper classes is increased, which contributes to inequality and unrest. The Chinese welfare system is also unrefined, which means that individuals put out of work by artificial intelligence will not have a reliable safety net, only adding to the civil discord. The AIDP specifies that in 2025, China will become a world leader in AI ethics. In its system, China specifies that ethical AI should promote human welfare, be accountable and clear in understanding, and that the data use has to be balanced between proper oversight and proprietary technology. However, through the vague definition of promoting human welfare, the Chinese government can increase surveillance under the guise of security. Also, the government defines what proper oversight means, which allows privacy abuses. By spreading its tendrils across the globe through private companies, China extends its predisposition to surveillance, a dangerous reality for those living in the 21st century. Moving on to my second case study. As we all know, there's an ongoing war in Ukraine, and Russia has used unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, in this war that require no manual control and cannot be GPS or radio jammed, as both physical and psychological warfare. These are primarily Iranian-made suicide drones, which dive into targets and explode. They also have a distinctive sound when flying overhead that alerts the Ukrainian population, contributing to the psychological warfare. However, this is not new to Russia. In fact, its use of psychological warfare dates to the Cold War, and it represents a pattern of Russia pressing asymmetric advantages only they have. For its artificial intelligence innovation, it's working on gathering information and data and reducing its dependence on outside sources. Like China, it also has dependence on Taiwanese semiconductors necessary for artificial intelligence. To lead its AI charge, it uses state-owned companies, as there are almost no startups in the country. And the greatest innovator in Russia currently in AI is Sberbank. Sberbank is a bank, not a tech company, but it hopes to create a system for citizens that is similar to China's city brain, where bank services, taxi services, and shopping are all available at the click of a button or a vocal command. This bank uses profit incentives to drive AI innovation, which is why they lead in Russia. Sberbank is not the only state-owned firm leading the AI charge. Intech Lab has a facial recognition technology called FindFace, which successfully led to the detainment of over 180 people at the World Cup. This technology is also used to find draft dodgers, but AI can make several mistakes, and this was the case when anti-war activist Yulia Shevtsova was detained by this AI mistakenly. Russia also uses artificial intelligence to create misinformation and confusion with the broad goal of undermining democracy. Russia exploits democracy with the creation of new democratic values rather than wrong democratic values, which ties in with the eventual January 6th attack on the Capitol. Fake African-American accounts encouraged voters to vote for third-party candidates or not at all. Fake accounts impersonated legitimate accounts, and propaganda such as this image were created to again boost outrage. The Internet Research Agency was in charge of this push, and the areas of interest for this agency include race, immigration, gun control, and LGBT issues, some of the most widely contested issues in American politics. The main goal here is not to support one system or political belief over another, but to cause havoc and chaos in the American political system. Russia's goal is not to create new divides, but amplify pre-existing divides. Russia is actively malicious in its use and creation of artificial intelligence algorithms. It believes that ethics hinder innovation and it has purposefully reduced ethical restrictions in what are called regulatory sandboxes, which will ideally improve investment and make innovation more accessible. Also, its contribution to misinformation means that it is harder to find truth for global citizens, and that the idea of truth as preserved online becomes distorted, which hinders the average person's ability to make rational, informed decisions about everyday life. Still, Russia is no longer the leader in the math and science field. It hasn't been since the Cold War. It's also drastically behind in innovation compared to other countries. Its preference of using domestic supply chains for semiconductors means it cannot take advantage of advanced technology. Moore's law, which states that the processing power of computers doubles every 2 years, means that the drawbacks of these sanctions compound over time. Still, Russia has enough artificial intelligence tech to cause harm, and its direct aversion to ethics allows it to pursue some avenues that others might consider immoral. Its proclivity for pressing asymmetric advantages supports Russia in its endeavor to promote misinformation. If democracies do not adeptly address Russia's AI use, Russia will continue to do what it has for decades: amplify existing divides in nations and create greater political instability. Moving on to my third case study, non-state actors' use of AI. ChatGPT, a text generation model, was created in 2020, and in January 2023 alone, the use of ChatGPT crossed 100 million users. If ChatGPT was a product, it'd be the most successful product of all time. ChatGPT is based on the GPT-3 model, and however, informal application programming interfaces created by users have been created by users to automatically prompt ChatGPT rather than logging in manually. This allows non-state actors to create biased or untruthful information automatically. To combat some of these issues, OpenAI has used reinforcement learning from human feedback to reduce the model's propensity to generate harmful content. This method has human labelers classify outputs as good or bad, and the model is trained based on those labels accordingly. To better understand how models like ChatGPT create their output in the first place, one has to look into the way that the model is built, called the architecture. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and the transformer architecture has two parts, the encoder and the decoder, but GPT only uses the decoder system. What the decoder does, it takes a sequence of words, in this case, welcome to NYC, and represents each word as a collection of numbers within the model. These numbers depend on the importance of the word in the sentence. This is called the attention layer of the model. Rather than taking into account either side of a given word when calculating this attention, the model only considers words on the left-hand side. This is called masked self-attention. Masked because words on the right-hand side are masked from the model. This decoder system is useful in the task of natural language generation. Given a sequence of words, what are the next few words that should be generated? A common example of natural language generation today is the message suggestions feature on smartphones. Because of the power contained within the model, ChatGPT has already been used in several malicious ways. It's been used to write malware. It's been used by fake sites claiming to be ChatGPT that host malware instead. And it's also been used in the fake generation of fake news articles. However, ChatGPT is not the only method that private actors can use AI for harm. Instead, actors can harvest data upon millions of users. And this was the case in the case of Facebook, where it had to pay a $550 million settlement in 2020 to settle a class action lawsuit over the use of facial recognition technology. Its tag suggestion service, which requires facial data to face match users in photos and suggest names, was the topic of this lawsuit. This lawsuit occurred in Illinois, where there are stringent facial recognition laws. In Illinois, Facebook was accused of harvesting facial data for tag suggestions from the photos of millions of users in the state without their permission and without telling them how long the data would be kept. Regardless if this is true or not, the current landscape requires users to submit personal data to use services. Tech companies should clarify what data is necessary, how it is stored, and who has access to it. And to further regulate these technology companies, the European Union has created what's called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. This is the most stringent data protection law in the world, and it specifies that consent for data provisions must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous, and that data subjects can withdraw previously given consent whenever they want, and companies have to honor that decision. However, this begs the question, when an artificial intelligence is trained on a data set, even if the data set is taken away, the artificial intelligence still has memory of that data set. Is a trained AI still using the data set or not? This legislation does not cover that specific instance. Private citizens can also use publicly trained artificial intelligence to cause harm, primarily in the form of deepfakes, which are forgeries of any digital image, video, audio, or text. Stable Diffusion, which is a text-to-image model, has been used to create anything from art to deepfake pornography. It's also been used for charity scams, creating images of fake disasters to generate income, political deepfakes, using fake images of political figures doing and saying what they did not, and advertisement fraud, creating fake celebrities using products, again, to generate revenue. In 2016, Microsoft unveiled Tay, an artificial intelligence Twitter chatbot that used reinforcement learning to improve its knowledge over time, rather than only training on the data set once. In 24 hours, Tay had gone from creating seemingly innocuous comments to launching racist and misogynistic remarks as a result of user manipulation through the social media platform. This was the chatbot of the past, crude and toxic, not much better than a robot parrot. But today, we have GPT-4, OpenAI's latest and greatest text generation model. It outperforms GPT-3 and ChatGPT on various language tasks. In this instance, GPT 3.5 or ChatGPT is represented by the blue, and GPT-4 is represented by the green. These are all AP exams given by the College Board, and as you can see, GPT-4 either outperforms or matches the performance of GPT 3.5 on every single exam. GPT-4 also has vision, meaning it can process text and images. This could be used such as when taking a picture of a refrigerator and describing meals you can make with the ingredients contained within. However, even GPT-4 is not perfect. It suffers from over and under generation, just like ChatGPT. In a piece about ChatGPT, Noam Chomsky, a linguist and cognitive scientist, has correctly claimed that ChatGPT suffers from overgeneration, where the model produces both truths and falsehoods, endorsing ethical and unethical decisions alike, as well as undergeneration, in which the model exhibits non-commitment to any decisions and indifference to consequences. To solve some of these issues with artificial intelligence, some individuals have come up with a solution. An open letter signed by Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, Andrew Yang, and other notable individuals calls for a pause on giant AI experiments for a 6-month period in order to allow policymakers to create and enact better laws that address the new abilities and potential harms of this technology. However, this is a fundamentally flawed approach. Thinking back to my China case study, China will use this definitely as a boost. While the West hampers its progress, China will continue to pursue its AIDP goals. OpenAI, a private company, has also enacted terms of service along with its artificial intelligence creation, proving that it can be done. Instead, we should first regulate the collection of data. The GDPR is a step in the right direction, and legislation should be as innovative as the technology which it is concerning. Legislation that actively addresses artificial intelligence only claims to promote innovation, rather than addressing privacy and livelihood concerns for private citizens. AI should be actively regulated by artificial intelligence. And within this regulation, artificial intelligence should be made to do no harm. And to combat the private actor use of artificial intelligence, moderation should be baked into the model structure itself. Also, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction used for nuclear weapons today should be used for lethal autonomous weapons. In conclusion, China, with its AIDP plan, its surveillance and data, and its Uyghur oppression, is undoubtedly using artificial intelligence maliciously. Russia, with its proclivity for pressing asymmetric advantages and its creation of misinformation, as well as its regulatory sandboxes, is using artificial intelligence maliciously. And for non-state actors, resources continue to increase. OpenAI has recently released a system called ChatGPT plugins, which allows developers to formally integrate applications. Actors can now use the computing power and train models of OpenAI to impact numerous industries, rather than hacking together a workaround. Still, with global collaboration and consensus, along with the possible use of artificial intelligence itself to aid in the endeavor, the issues of asymmetric advantages, mass data collection, and malicious artificial intelligence use can be mitigated and hopefully solved. Finally, for my literature review, the three sources that I focused on in my literature review on malicious AI use provided a comprehensive understanding of the topics from different perspectives. The article, The Panopticon is Already Here by Ross Anderson, explores the potential dangers of surveillance technology and how it can be misused by governments and corporations. Stephanie Petrella's article, Russia's Artificial Intelligence Strategy, The Role of State-Owned Firms, provides insight into how state-owned companies in Russia are using AI to gain an advantage in various sectors, including military applications. Finally, OpenAI's GPT-4 model card sheds light on the potential risks associated with large language models and how OpenAI is taking steps to mitigate those risks. By analyzing these sources, I gained a deeper understanding of the potential threats of malicious AI use, the need for proactive measures to prevent it. The paragraph I just read to you was generated by ChatGPT. Thank you all for listening. I look forward to your questions.
Russia seems to be looking at this issue externally, trying to destabilize the West and the United States in particular, while China, it seems to be focused just internally on the Uyghurs. Two parts of this question. Is China going after any other regions or minority groups within China other than the Uyghurs? And has there been any attempts, flipping that back to Russia, any attempts by Russia to go after any of its internal enemies, or is it just looking at this as an external issue?
So the reason I chose the Uyghur population as my main source of information is because China's use of artificial intelligence is rampant there. No other sources that I've seen have claimed that Russia is really using this artificial intelligence and gathering data on other minority populations to a greater extent. And repeat the Russia part of your question.
Is Russia using this internally at all against any enemies of the state, any ethnic minorities, religious minorities, or groups that may disagree with the Putin administration?
Yes, I mean, the anti-war activist that I talked about, Yulia Shivtova, she was detained by this malicious artificial intelligence, and its detainment of draftees, of draft dodgers, suggests that Russia aims to kind of promote harm within all of its population.
Any indication that this technology will be used in the United States, especially by areas like law enforcement, in the criminal justice system, where there could be potential dangers and abuse by the state? Any indication this may be potentially used by authorities within our own country?
Yes, it's from just the Facebook standpoint of gathering mass data and using that data to train artificial intelligence, as well as maybe body cams on police officers that can be used maybe in tandem with facial recognition. I think it's viewed by the United States as probably a helpful technology to kind of surveil the population. So there's definitely a chance.
Turn it over to the committee. Ms. Beard?
Could you characterize how your fear has evolved over the course of this project?
Yeah, so when I first started, I had the concept of artificial intelligence in my mind that kind of, I feel like everybody has, that it's this sort of program that we don't really know how it works and it's intelligence somehow. But as I've kind of done research, I realized it's all just math, and it really matters the intention of the like how it's created, and the intention of the actors who create it. That's the problem. Artificial intelligence is neither good or bad. It's just the intention. So in regards to my personal life, I guess, I'm less prone to kind of sharing personal things online. Because that data is another way to train artificial intelligence. But that's just kind of how it's impacted my daily life.
All right, I got some. All right. So starting off with China, do you think it's possible at some point for China, or not just possible, do you think it's likely at some point that Chinese corporations will resist some of these unethical practices, or do you feel like there's, they're based on the way they're currently coupled with the government. Are they driven so much by fear, or is it the financial incentive that's really driving that behavior? And like, will they be able to resist that? Like, that's something they can overcome at some point. Like, is there a line that you feel like they will not cross?
I don't really think so. Partially because of financial incentive, and partially because China actually has legislation that forces private companies to give up some of this data, again, under the guise of kind of security. But still, private companies really can't do anything about it if they're operating in China.
And sort of a follow-up to this is, the GDPR set up and establishing standards, which and honestly kind of leading like on a global scale of, how we should be approaching AI from an ethical sense. So my question is, do you think those standards can truly reach a global scale, or do you feel like everyone's going to want to have their own kind of pocket AI and be unregulated?
I do think that some admittedly broad regulation can be achieved on the global level. That's why we have mass like international bodies such as the UN or the EU to kind of facilitate that discussion. But I do think creating AI for good is something that we can all agree to, not just as countries, but as individuals.
All right, I'm going to pass it on to Joe.
Yeah, my question actually follows from what you just said. You've been, of course, telling us about malicious uses. Did you come across in your research, or have you, in your own sort of thinking, come across any potential benevolent uses of AI by the state, by government?
By the state? I mean, in China, of course, surveillance and under the guise of security is considered a benevolent use, not just by the government, but by its citizens as well. And then in regards to the United States, I didn't really focus on it. So I don't really know much about the United States government's use of artificial intelligence per se. But I'm sure there are several benevolent uses, and definitely with private companies as well. They have created AI to be used solely for good.
Fantastic job. I feel depressed and entertained at the same time. I had a question. Oh, I don't even know if this is possible, so forgive me if my question is ignorant. But have there been any attempts, did you find in your research, by any kind of like rogue whatevers to try to like disrupt the algorithms, to try to, like just screw with the system?
Yeah. There's this thing called GANs, which are a type of artificial intelligence. GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Network. And what it does, one of the coolest uses I've found is that it can create image patches that look like just a mess to us, but confuses these artificial intelligence algorithms that use facial recognition. So it completely disrupts the entire system, which is kind of an asymmetric advantage for Chinese citizens if they wish to not be surveilled.
It's such the people that paint their face like it's white and then they put like black blocks or like yeah. I know what you're talking about. Okay. Yeah.
And kind of along a similar question that was kind of already asked, but has ChatGPT, have they like come out and said, we want the use, we intend for our program to be used in this way, which is good. And have they given any kind of explicit ways in which people can use their product or their service like to benefit society?
Yeah, even on the homepage of ChatGPT, it gives you some prompts. I think one is like explaining some scientific term, but it's useful for maybe you need a mentor when you don't have one and you need a little bit of information about a topic. It's useful when doing things such as information searching. Instead of Googling and trying to find an article that kind of describes what you're asking for, you can just type in as you would to a normal person and get kind of a reply that's tailored to your question.
Okay.
And the uses are generally endless. Yeah.
Interesting. Great job.
Thank you.
Audience questions?
Jonathan.
So one concern that I've personally heard from other people and that I've thought myself in the past is, what is the potential for these AI systems to replace jobs in the workforce. And while you can't obviously replace some like labor-heavy tasks, but jobs like computer, like software developers, what did you find in your work relating to that?
So it's my personal belief that pretty much all jobs are going or are able to be replaced by artificial intelligence, such as, I mean, ChatGPT also has the ability to create programs, to create code, and GPT-4, it's still in beta testing. You have to pay to access it, so I haven't gotten to play around with it yet. But my suspicion is that its ability to generate code and generate useful information far surpasses that of many amateur developers. Programming is just one avenue. Doctors, lawyers, maybe even teachers can, I think, all be replaced by artificial intelligence, but that doesn't mean they should be. Yeah. Aaron?
So I guess what's like the likelihood of AI being used to spread propaganda or potentially like used as an extremist platform to spread propaganda for means of radicalizing people into a terrorist organization?
Yeah. So Stable Diffusion, the text-to-image model that I talked about, can be prompted with really any text. And through the use of prompt engineering, actors can create specific prompts that might get around moderation and could promote, like, intentionally create harmful content. So it's definitely possible that extremists could use artificial intelligence for harm. Audio.
I want to know your thoughts on like the Snapchat AI. I want to like with that widespread availability to AI and now it just being on an app that a lot of young people have access to, especially on Snapchat.
To me, it's scary. I've read kind of the terms of service of using the Snapchat AI, and in the little box that pops up, it even says that what you submit to the AI is used for kind of ad generation. I do believe it's using some form of GPT-4 because it has the ability to process images, which is kind of an interesting case considering that GPT-4 is still supposed to be in beta. Those are just kind of my thoughts. I generally stay away from it though.
And then like, sorry, how do you think that with like, especially with younger generations, how do you think that's going to impact like social skills?
It might make them a little bit less social if they're typing away at a phone, for instance. But the text that ChatGPT generates is generally not that emotionally intriguing. I mean, in this text that I generated, it's very first, next, finally, kind of things that you might see in a 4th or 5th grade English class. I think it's overall detrimental. Mr. Justice.
So I got to thinking about this. I know, American was not your focus in your studies, but there's been a couple things recently with individual actors using artificial intelligence. A recent news article was about a mother who received a call and sounds like her daughter's on the line and is she's being kidnapped, and they're trying to ransom her. And after talking long enough, she's able to determine that it was not her. But so that's just the beginnings, right? Like of people simulating voices by training voices on data. Did you come across anything where police on a national scale or local scale of any of the states are starting to train on like how to recognize things like this?
I found an article not talking about voices, but talking about generated people, and it kind of specifies you can tell with some of these preliminary models maybe how their teeth look, how their eyelashes look in the background, that this is kind of a person generated by AI. But I love that you brought up voice deepfakes. I did some research into that. There's this technology that's open to the public. I found on GitHub, which is a code sharing site, that what it can do is take in American accents and convert them to British accents, or take in a male voice and convert them to female voices and vice versa. And as computing power increases, as our knowledge of algorithms increase, that kind of action will only be used, or will continue to be used, and maybe even used for harm. Charlotte.
What would you say to the doomsday theorist who thinks that AI is going to take over the world and be the end of humanity as we know it?
Even after my malicious kind of study in malicious AI use, I still think artificial intelligence is going to do more good than harm. And I sure hope those words won't bite me back in the future. But,
Sorry for taking that.
yeah. But it's really all about AI education. Most people don't have a good understanding of what artificial intelligence is. So just by educating kind of the public, educating how to spot artificial intelligence use, that's kind of going to be the key in mitigating some of those bad uses.
Just as a continuation, Alex, first of all, congratulations. Excellent job. I'm a veteran of the IT industry for 25 years, and when I compare, there's actually no comparison between your development as a senior and where I was at your age. So congratulations to you and your mentors. Yes, just as a follow-on question, do you plan maybe on continuing this research and developing maybe something like an ethical AI that can look for some of these patterns? Because traditionally legislation is always behind, and I don't believe that that's a solution to the problem. So are you going to be, doing something maybe in the future to, so that we all have hope again?
That's all we need.
And there's some excellent examples. The call is a good one. I manage a security team. We actually have recent examples of somebody recording our IT team and calling some of our employees pretending to be us, using our voices. And so it is a thing that we are dealing with. So do you plan on continuing this maybe and doing something on the ethical side that can maybe reverse the causes of this?
Yes. So I'm going to college studying computer science. That's just kind of a preliminary step. And then I'll be going into kind of a more specific computer science field, possibly artificial intelligence, maybe cybersecurity as well. But to your point about legislation, one thing that I didn't get to cover is that creating legislation is definitely slow. But companies like OpenAI can communicate with policymakers to say kind of what they're creating before it's actually created. This is how OpenAI releases its terms of service as well. By increasing communication, I do think legislators will be able to push out laws in time. Is there anything I missed?
No, okay.
Thank you.
Oh.
Get a photo with the team. Team, come on up for a photo. That's how you want us to do it? Okay.
I'm already
A little closer. Okay, King, is that it?
Yes. Yellow red at my face.
All right, watch your step. Family next.
What's up, man?
Yeah, I'm gonna get Aaron. Where are you at, Aaron? Get a bottle of water.
Yes, absolutely. All right.
Every time you say AI, I still think about
If you don't mind, I'll take hold of my camera. No, all of it.
All right, thank you. Alex, fantastic job. Oh, I'm almost.
Just a little too much. Oh, that was so good.
You're consistent, sir. Consistent.
Aaron, do you have another one?
Yes, Mr. Marcus. No,
Do you have a third?
yeah, Mr. Marcus, he's back there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right, yeah. It's gonna crash after it's over.
I'm not sure.
Why would you say that?
Is that a good thing? Well, welcome everyone. You ready to go? Okay. Welcome everyone to our 18th of 22 Senior Honors Thesis Defenses. It's awesome to see, we're diving into the academics here, and then we've got band in a couple hours. I mean, we truly have gifted kids across the board in so many areas, and it's a joy to work with these guys. I mean, I get really pumped up listening to the presentations, the audience participation, the Q&A, and again, this is a great place to work, and never doubt that we've got the best students in the country here. So let Aaron take over here. Again, I think we had some topics this year that might have been influenced by the Honors International Studies Seminar. Usually dark and disturbing topics, yesterday, of course, and Adam and Aaron all delving into topics related to extremism and such. And again, so relevant still today in 2023. And I think you're really going to enjoy the case studies here that Aaron will talk about in the lone wolf terrorism topic. So let's give it up for Aaron Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Toppich. Hello, my name is Aaron Wallace, and welcome to the defense of my senior thesis, Lone Wolf Terrorism, a comparative analysis of America's most dangerous domestic threat. Before we start, I'd like to discuss a few key sources within my thesis that were crucial in writing it. The first was the psychology of radicalization and de-radicalization, how the significance quest impacts violent extremism. This source deals with the psychology that goes into the transition from civilian to terrorist. Next, we have Bring the War Home by Kathleen Belew, which was used heavily in chapter 2 and 3 to inform me on white nationalism and the anti-government movement. And we have Dying to Kill, which was used heavily in chapter 4 to inform my knowledge on the suicide terrorism used by the Chechen rebels and the Boston bombers. A few other key sources include the Perspectives on Terrorism Journal, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security Strategic Assessment and data on domestic terrorism, which is basically the FBI's publication regarding to domestic terrorism. And then the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is an organization that specializes in primarily hate crime and racial violence. My first section focuses on defining the lone wolf and contextualizing the different theories of radicalization. America faces a new and extremely dangerous threat in the form of lone wolf terrorism. Lone wolf terrorist is defined as one who commits political violence against one's country in some way, including racial violence, anti-government violence, and religious violence. Furthermore, lone wolves also cannot be acting as part of a larger organization. They have to be just that, lone. From the late 20th to 21st century, there have been over 170 lone wolf attacks that have been classified as terrorism. Even though lone wolf terrorism is relatively new in the context of American threats, it has now undeniably risen to the top of the United States' most pressing threats. The psychological process in which ordinary citizens become terrorists is known as radicalization. It is crucial to the continued rise of this type of terrorism. Without radicalization, there are simply no terrorists. There are many ways individuals can become radicalized, but at least for lone wolves, they all have one thing in common. Radicalization is largely done remotely, and the advent of the internet only compounds this issue. Another key aspect to the lethality of lone wolves is the difficulty associated with tracking them and their paths and their radicalization and their attacks. Often they are radicalized completely by remote means or by individuals close to them, and they leave much less of a paper trail than organizations would. Radicalization refers once again to the psychological conditioning process in which ordinary citizens are brainwashed into believing a false ideology. The final step of radicalization occurs when the individual accepts violence as a possibility. Radicalization can take a variety of different forms with differing degrees and timelines respectively, but all forms of radicalization within this paper end in one commonality: complete belief and commitment to a cause that drives one to the point of committing mass violence under the illusion that it is morally right and justified. Some might argue that mere participation in a radical act some might argue that mere participation in a protest is a radical act, as if the ideology being conveyed is radical, then so is the action of supporting it. But others who believe in a theory known as the degrees of radicalization, which was mentioned in the journal that I mentioned earlier, the Radicalization and Significance Quest journal, would say that participation in a protest is not radical because it does not involve any kind of direct violent act. While some things may point to radical tendencies, not all acts are violent in nature, therefore not all radical in nature. An act is considered radical when there is a movement towards violence. The radicalization process begins with something called the awakening of the goal of significance. An individual seeking more of a place in the world or fulfillment of their purpose can be described as being on a quest towards significance. The crucial turning point within the radicalization process is when the offender realizes or becomes convinced that violence is not only right, but it is justified. Within my thesis, I used 3 case studies: Dylan Roof in the Charleston Church Massacre, Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing, and finally the Sarnath brothers in the Boston Marathon bombing. My second chapter was mainly about white nationalism and Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof was radicalized primarily through the use of social media and online white supremacist forums. There are countless different elements of Roof's radicalization, but his motivation and his possible missed warning signs that could have presented a lone wolf attack on the African American community. He was obsessed with the history of white nationalism within America. History played a key role not only in Roof's radicalization, but the very choosing of the site for his attack. South Carolina, Charleston, and the Mother Emanuel African American Episcopalian Church all held significant historical value associated with either civil rights or the oppression of those rights. The movement that has come to be known as white nationalism has been present within America for centuries. After the end of the Civil War and the passing of the 13th Amendment and subsequent amendments involved with regarding African American rights, the white power movement soon began. The newly freed African American slaves were seen as inferior by their white former owners. White power became a battle cry for those in the South who were furious that their way of life had just been taken away from them. These so-called Christians further back their use of chattel slavery and the war with the Bible, and continue to use it as justification for saying that their race is superior to all others. The white supremacist movement has several different areas within it that have come under official recognition by the US government. A few of these include, but are not limited to, the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis, racist skinheads, identity Christianity, paramilitary, anti-government organizations, and many others. White nationalists have fallen into using the trap of using false assumptions of their faith based on a literal reading of the Bible. This has caused the massive white ideals to be injected into the Christian faith and in turn become taught in many U.S. churches. It has also been found that historical components of racism within America continue to be the primary motivation for many white nationalists today. The Confederate flag, for example, continues to be flown to this day as a symbol of their white pride, and is seen time and time again within white nationalist websites as one of their main symbols. Many individuals involved within the white nationalist movement use historical symbols such as the swastika, the Confederate flag, the Celtic cross, and the number 88, among others, as a calling card to indicate to others within the movement that they are within the movement. The internet has become a tool used by organizations across many different ideologies to radicalize more and more people every day. Think of an exponential growth function. Since the advent of the internet and social media, membership in white nationalist organizations has skyrocketed, growing exponentially each year. It brings fragmented and marginalized people together into one virtual meeting place and creates a massive echo chamber that only further reinforces the ideas preached by terrorists. While many websites exist across the internet for the purpose of radicalizing and discussing white nationalism, one stands out as the prime example of an online community based around the sole purpose of perpetrating white nationalism and using different groups within. Stormfront.org. This website was started in 1995 by clan boss Don Black for the purpose of spreading white nationalism across borders without having to physically meet. Stormfront engages in something entirely different from traditional websites. It seeks to build a community. Stormfront is unique in that it's not a traditional website where only one person can post something on the website, but instead it's a forum where anybody can post anything at any time. Dylan Storm Roof was the child of a divorce, with his father being the primary parent in his life. Roof faced much hardship as a child through both his divorced parents and his father, who was his primary caretaker, who was also known to be a racist. And without a doubt, his father contributed to his radicalization and to his white nationalist beliefs. On the night of June 17, 2015, a small congregation was gathered within the Mother Emanuel African American Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, for a routine Bible study. None of the members expected anything when a new member of the church walked through the doors. Minutes before entering, Dylan Roof sat in his car contemplating as he carefully loaded 88 bullets into the magazine for a Glock 45 caliber pistol he had purchased legally a few weeks earlier. Roof then walked into the church and brutally killed 9 of the members that night, and along with non-fatally injuring another one. For Chapter 3, I focused on the anti-government movement, Timothy McVeigh, and the Oklahoma City bombing. McVeigh was part of several different groups, the anti-government far-right militia, and even white nationalism. But his primary motivation for the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995 has been cited as a retaliation for the siege on the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge. McVeigh acted mostly alone and ultimately would become the perpetrator of the deadliest lone wolf terrorist attack in American history that was homegrown, so it was done by an American citizen. The underlying movement in which McVeigh was a member of must be thoroughly understood. Without the movement, there would be no McVeigh, and certainly no Oklahoma City bombing. The anti-government movement followed a rather evolutionary path, forged ahead by key events in American history, such as the tragedy of the Vietnam War being contrasted with a victory in the Gulf. The events which took place at Ruby Ridge and the siege on the Branch Davidians at their compound in Waco, Texas. Timothy McVeigh was a veteran of the Army, and war played a massive role in his life, along with fueling his obsession with guns. The origins of the anti-government militia movement can be traced all the way back to the Vietnam War. Many veterans went into the war feeling patriotic and ready to serve their country, only to come back feeling betrayed and doubting the legitimacy of their own government. Vietnam was often seen as an example of a failure of the US government and the inability of current leaders to control an ongoing crisis and ultimately fight a war. The Gulf War contrasted the Vietnam War by showing how a quick victory was the result of a strong and consequently right-leaning government in power. The quick victory of the Gulf versus the slow and painful loss of Vietnam became a key pillar in which people like McVeigh used to show how the government was the main reason for the massive loss in Vietnam, and that the leaders during the Vietnam War betrayed their fellow Americans for the sake of pleasing the Vietnamese and persevering democracy instead of fighting a war. Timothy McVeigh cites 2 events for his radical beliefs: the siege on the Branch Davidians compound in Waco, Texas, and the focus of this section, the United States Marshals and FBI raid on the Weaver family at Ruby Ridge. The U.S. Marshals and the FBI arrived at the Weaver family compound to arrest Randy Weaver after he had failed to appear for a court date over federal firearms charges. While the FBI was on patrol, the Weaver's dog was alerted, causing panic, and subsequently, an FBI sniper took fire and killed both Vicky Weaver and Sammy Weaver. Vicky was Randy's wife. The FBI had inherited an already bad case with many details either missing or not logical, so their following persecution of the remaining Weavers was also seen as evidence for corruption within the government, only causing further distrust. Ruby Ridge became a reason for radical French to form paramilitary groups and stockpile arms in order to protect themselves from a perceived threat of a totalitarian overreach by a New World Order. While Ruby Ridge may be the spark of the American militia movement, the siege of a small compound belonging to a Christian, or so they called themselves Christian, organization called the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, only furthered the distrust of America's government. The Branch Davidians, headed up by David Koresh or Vernon Howell, believed that the apocalypse was coming, and they needed to hide out in their Mount Carmel compound in order to protect themselves from the imminent threat of destruction. The authorities began to have their suspicions of the Branch Davidians that they were in possession of illegal firearms. In 1992, a routine UPS delivery to the compound sparked the ATF investigation into the compound that would lead to the eventual siege of the Branch Davidians. On the morning of April 19, 1993, tear gas began to be pumped into the compound by tanks. Despite being told the tear gas would follow a slow, gradual insertion plan, they drastically increased the speed after reports of gunfire. The surveillance devices used by the FBI had picked up discussions between the Davidians to start fires within the compound. By noon, the compound began to burn in at least 3 places. The building soon became engulfed in the blaze and was destroyed extremely quickly. Only 9 Davidians escaped the fire, leaving 70 people, including at least 17 children, to die in the blaze. The failures of the ATF in Waco fueled McVeigh with anger towards the government. It was the final spark that sent him over the edge to begin a spiral towards violence. When William Pierce introduced the Turner Diaries under the alias Andrew McDonald, he brought into fruition a new era of racism and far-right violence. Timothy McVeigh was especially absorbed within the book's literature. Describing during his time at the Gulf War, his fellow soldiers revealed that he would often carry around the novel and even sell it to other people on the base. The Turner Diaries is often called the white supremacist Bible, and that certainly holds true for much of his followers, but in McVeigh's case, the plans to attack a government building via a nitroglycerin truck bomb were eerily similar to the attack he executed on Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma City bombing was one of the deadliest domestic terrorist attacks in United States history. It occurred on April 19, 1995, when a truck bomb exploded outside the Alfred P. Murrah building downtown in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people and injuring hundreds more. The attack was carried out by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, both of whom were later convicted of the crime and sentenced to life in prison. The planning and execution of the Oklahoma City bombing was a complex and sinister operation that took months to carry out. McVeigh, a former U.S. Army soldier, was motivated by a deep hatred of the federal government, which he believed was becoming increasingly tyrannical and oppressive. McVeigh became the deadliest lone wolf terrorist in American history that day. Chapter 4 focuses on radical Islamic terrorism in the Boston Marathon bombing of 2013, sorry. Chapter 4, yes. The Sarnay brothers' motivations behind their attack are surrounded with much controversy. However, it is evident that they belong to a terrorist ideology of some kind, more than likely being motivated by the radical Islamic groups present within their home region of Chechnya. While the older of the two, Tamerlan, is often cited as the mastermind of the operations, both brothers presented several traits and warning signs prior to the attacks that pointed towards a direction of spiraling into radical terrorism. The Sarnay brothers were not only influenced by the radical Chechen rebels, but they in fact ethnically were Chechen themselves. Russia has fought 2 wars in the region where bombings and civilian casualties have become increasingly commonplace by both sides. Russians have reportedly broken countless international laws during their efforts to try and quell the Chechens' cries for succession. The explosion of suicide terrorism in Chechnya in the early 2000s can be attributed to the introduction of a tactic by terrorists originating in the Arabian Peninsula, primarily Al-Qaeda. While the tactic was certainly present in the first war and the years of the Second War prior to the existence of terror organizations within the region, Al-Qaeda agents and similar organizations created a framework for the organization of effective suicide bombing attacks like the one seen in the Arabian Peninsula. Along with the Arabian terrorists within Chechnya, there also existed members of the Mujahideen from the Russo-Afghan wars. The Islamic fighters were one of the few groups that supported the Chechen cause, as they had experienced a very similar invasion and oppression by Russian forces, but they had ultimately won their war. The Sarnay brothers' radicalization carves a path from the mountains of the Caucasus region to their personal devices within their Boston apartments. First and foremost, the brothers, or at least Tamerlan, were not only radicalized by Chechen rebels, but they were also radicalized by Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda's publications online. There is no evidence of the brothers ever coming in direct in-person contact with the group, but both bombers admitted to and were subsequently found of frequenting the Inspire magazine, which Al-Qaeda scholar Reuben Paz labels as their internet-based University of Jihad. Both Tamerlan and Dzhokhar became members of the ideology of Al-Qaeda, being directly inspired by its members' writings and through online contact with its members through message boards. Their own personal struggles with their identity, along with a sense of not belonging in their relatively new country, not only made them more vulnerable to radicalization, it also made their attack more deadly, as they saw suicide terrorism as not only logical, but ideal. At precisely 2:49 p.m. on April 15, 2013, the first bomb went off in front of Marathon Sports, killing Crystal Marie Campbell and burning and maiming countless others. Approximately 12 seconds later, the second bomb went off in front of the Forum restaurant, killing Lingzi Liu and Martin Richard, and injuring many others. The bomb set off on April 15, 2013, near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, killed or injured 280 people and was the cost of 3 lives. Finally, I will discuss my policy recommendations to prevent lone wolf terrorism. One of the critical elements in preventing lone wolf terrorism is increased cooperation and information sharing between different law enforcement agencies such as the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security, both nationally and internationally. By sharing this information, law enforcement agencies can identify potential threats and take appropriate action before an attack occurs. Another effective strategy for preventing lone wolf terrorism is to implement preventative measures that target vulnerable individuals who may be at risk of being radicalized. These measures could include providing counseling and support to individuals who have experienced traumatic events such as the loss of a loved one or a job. This could help prevent them from turning to extremist groups for support and a sense of belonging. Additionally, community programs can be established to provide education and resources for those who may be vulnerable to extremist propaganda. Surveillance and monitoring of individuals who may be at risk of carrying out a lone wolf attack is another effective strategy for preventing terrorism. This can involve monitoring social media and other online platforms for extremist content, as well as monitoring travel patterns and other activities that may be indicative of extremist behavior. While there are concerns about privacy and civil liberties, it is essential to strike a balance between protecting individual rights and preventing international terrorist attacks. Engagement with communities is also very important in preventing lone wolf terrorism. It involves building trust and establishing relationships between law enforcement and local communities. It is important for law enforcement agencies to engage with communities to better gain a knowledge of understanding of the issues they face and to establish a sense of trust and credibility. This can help to identify potential threats and prevent them before they occur. Additionally, engaging with communities can help to build resilience and promote a sense of social cohesion, which can prevent individuals from becoming radicalized in the first place. By implementing all of these strategies, law enforcement agencies can effectively prevent and combat lone wolf terrorism, protecting the safety and security of citizens. Thank you.
How important is the concept of marginalization and humiliation in these case studies? And a second question, if you had a fourth case study or additional time, would there have been another case study you would have liked to have added? First, marginalization.
Yes. So as far as marginalization, I read about this in the radicalization and de-radicalization source, and it talked about, it went into a bunch of different psychological studies where it was talking about, say, if this person, like, it put them in situations they would play a game and lose or win, and if they lost, they were actually much more susceptible to becoming radicalized, all because it centers around that idea of losing significance and having some kind of grievance against the world. And that was certainly key in the Sarnay brothers, with Dzhokhar being failing out of college and Tamerlan being a failing boxer. Both had personal grievances against not only America, but like in their own life. So the marginalization of people is certainly a really major factor that contributes to people becoming radicalized. And then
additional case study,
okay.
If you had a chance.
Well, I wanted to originally do the I forgot his name, the terrorist Anders Behring Breivik in Norway. Yes, Norway. I really wanted to do that case, but I decided to focus on all American threats. But I think it would have been interesting to discuss an international case as well, just to get not only an American perspective, but a perspective from the international community as well.
What role does the media play in in particular social media in the radicalization process, and also, I think, promoting this whole concept of the victim, the humiliation aspect. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Right. Well, social media, obviously, it allows for information to be shared very rapidly. Like, take, for example, message boards like stormfront.org. It's a website, but it's also a form of social media because it's a form in which anybody can post anything. And it allows for really propaganda and information to be spread rapidly and throughout the world without really any combatant or any combat from anybody.
Mr. Sim.
You briefly touched on this in your presentation, but you did a lot more in your thesis. What do you see as the characteristics of someone who's likely to become this lone-wolf terrorist?
Right. So one of the key factors is that you have some kind of personal or political grievance, either against your government or you have something in your life that has happened that's a traumatic event. Say you're dropping out of college, your government's oppressing you, like in the case of the Chechens or the Tsarnaev brothers, they were historically oppressed. The Chechens were. They were immigrants, they were struggling to assimilate. All those factors could have pointed towards not necessarily predisposition, but a heightened risk of becoming susceptible to radicalization. Because terrorist organizations also not only, they know their audience, they're going to prey on those certain vulnerabilities inside of a person to get more people in their organization.
Were you able to reach out to any experts in the field? Have any contact with any individuals?
I attempted to contact a lawyer from he was actually the defense attorney for the Tsarnaev brothers and for Dylan Roof. I attempted to contact him and he said no to me because it was like still kind of an active case, I guess, so he couldn't discuss anything regarding it. But that was really my only person I tried to reach out to.
You mentioned the balance between privacy and security.
Right.
And I feel like that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
So I just heard Alex
Yeah,
telling
it's similar to him.
like if we put 500, like 500 million security cameras around and use a bunch of AI to make sure we don't have any terrorists around, people say we're going too far.
Right.
So I guess where is that line between the government going too far?
Right. I think in that it's almost not saying what we have now is sufficient, but what we have now is a good model. Or like, I guess if you've been on Instagram recently, like now they'll flag posts for possible misinformation or like if it's been altered or if it's possible propaganda or sensitive information, something like that on websites even, like to warn someone that this could be propaganda or warn that this could be an extremist idea is not sufficient, but it's a good starting point to further develop into more of a watching.
So who's in charge of deciding if something could be propaganda?
I feel like it probably need to be separate from the government. It need to be an organization that is comprised of many different people from different backgrounds. So it's not, and there's no like implicit bias within that organization. It needs to be people from everywhere so they can comparatively look at it and see if this is extremist propaganda or not.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that intervention, that identification and intervention of those potential threats and the role that the community has in that.
Right.
So did you run across any initiatives that are, maybe not just locally, but in the United States in general that are kind of helping civilians and also law enforcement know what to do, what to look for, how to report, how to intervene?
Right. And the journal, again, talked about that, the de-radicalization portion where and even then it's largely, it's so heavily dependent on the psychological aspects of the radicalization rather than the physical. It's almost like these people need to go to a sort of, not therapy, well, I guess, yeah, therapy. I don't know what else, I don't know what else to call it, but some kind of like psychological de-radicalization process in which like these ideas of grievance towards the government and stuff is being taken out of them. And then I guess for the community, I didn't really come across anything like this specific for terrorists, but I know for crime, there's the Neighborhood Watch Association, which is like a national watchdog thing where people report things. And there's obviously apps in existence already to report suspicious activity. And it's just up to the community to be diligent and report suspicious activity like that.
Great job. I'm very proud of you.
Yeah, I'll echo that. You did a wonderful job. I'm kind of interested in like big picture stuff and, the cultural component. You talk about the psychological vulnerabilities. Is there something about America though, like American culture, that makes it conducive to people who feel isolated or people who have been, feel they've been wronged to act or respond in this way? I mean, certainly, other people in other countries feel that way, but we have such a high rate of this here. Is there something culturally that kind of leads to this?
Well, I feel like America societally, we really struggle with actively marginalizing people. Like it's a problem in America that we have a lot of people in this country are marginalized by or the majority of Americans, and it's becoming increasingly prevalent every single day. And it's not even that. The polarization of America, you see with Dylan Roof and with McVeigh, polarization caused them to get to the far right and to really just take part of these radical ideas. And so many people are moving either far right, far left, or it's just polarization in general is becoming another key factor in creating lone wolf terrorists.
So kind of along the same lines, I know you talk a lot about social media and the internet as far as, the radicalization process, but what about like news media and the way in which we talk about, terrorist attacks and the way in which we talk about it, in public forums?
Right.
How does that also play into all of this?
Well, there's certainly the problem within media networks of bias and how different media networks would cover a certain event. So like say one media who's in favor of a certain ideal that maybe an anti-government member would probably talk less of the anti-government attack than someone who's not really in favor of the anti-government militia, obviously. But media plays as big a role as the internet just because they're so intertwined now that even like most of our media that we consume is on social media now. So it's really one and the same.
Audience questions.
Alex. Yeah, so you mentioned that white nationalists use or misinterpret the Bible to kind of feed their ideology. Are there any examples of passages you can give that kind of show how white nationalists misinterpret the Bible?
So I talked about this a lot in my actual paper, and I did quote a passage. I'm sorry, I don't remember what passage it was, but I know there's a whole section of the church that really, or a whole denomination. I wouldn't even call it a denomination because they're not exactly Christian, but they call themselves a denomination of the Christian faith, where it's like Christian identity, Christian fundamentalists. I can't remember if it's evangelicals or evangel. It's one of those.
Or Old Testament, right?
Yeah, a lot of Old Testament. It's just taken at the root from a very literal reading of the Bible, where it's like if you have to do it in exactly the way that it's said, and it's not adapted for the time, and it's also not the really traditional like the Bible that we use today. It's a different version of the Bible that they read. Audia.
Do you like amount of people in the military like these radical groups? I know you were talking about how like Big Bay was able to sell the territories while he was in the military. So is that like a common idea?
Actually, I don't know if I talked about this a lot in my thesis, but just across my own research and also being interested in joining the military, I obviously did research on this. It's kind of scary. Radicalization is a really big problem in the military, especially within the enlisted ranks, because it's such a brotherhood that if one person is going to adopt an ideology, that pretty much a whole company of people is going to adopt that and be like, oh, I guess this is interesting. I want to research this if my fellow soldier is researching this. And it's just, the military also, obviously, it encourages gun culture. It encourages all of that, which only further compounds the issue of terrorism, because terrorism is obviously very close with gun culture. Noah.
So why would a radicalized person go for the more lone wolf territory instead of going with an organized terrorist group, especially with access and being able to contact all these people with similar ideas through online internet forums and social media?
Okay, well, so the appeal of lone wolf terrorism is, I talked about this in my thesis again, but it's the appeal is the amount of damage one person can cause for a relatively low cost. Like take McVeigh, for example. It was one person, it was not very financially expensive to him, and he was able to, kill 170 people and then injure something like that. It was a lot of people, but overall, it's just the amount of damage that one person can cause compared to the cost, I guess. And also, a lot of terrorist groups now, they're becoming well known and tracked, and they're becoming actively persecuted. Like take Al Qaeda or ISIS. America has even taken military initiatives to combat them in their regions. So as a lone wolf, the difficulty of tracking for the government is obviously a positive because it means you can get away with more without being caught.
The key concept of isolation too will
Yeah.
sometimes lead to this
Mhm.
paranoia that
Yeah.
sets in.
Maya.
So you talked a little bit about like some radical online forums.
Uh-huh.
So how much should content on like mainstream forums, like places like Twitter and Reddit,
Yeah.
how much should that be regulated?
Yeah.
And how much would the regulation of that content lead to people retreating into further, like more radical spaces?
Right, and I feel like you have to strike a balance there because when something like that gets regulated, people are obviously going to be like, oh, the government's overstepping. Like, I'm afraid of the government now. It's only going to compound the problem. But at the same time, you don't want extremist propaganda being openly posted. So it's a balancing act between, again, the sense of privacy and protecting the safety of citizens. Alex.
Kind of going off of that, what are your opinions on the new social media networks that have been created? Kind of alt-right networks.
Like, could you give an example?
Truth
Like Truth Social?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an iffy place because at that, like, you have to really, especially with these, if you anger these far right military groups, like, you make them think you're taking their freedom of speech, or you have to be really careful about the First Amendment and make sure you're upholding that while also not letting actively any harmful words come out like propaganda. But it just, I don't know, I feel like it needs to be regulated more than it is currently.
Flip back to the Mia Bloom slide. You have to flip back anyways for the photo off.
Mia Bloom?
Yeah, on the lit review.
Okay. Dying to kill?
Mia Bloom actually infiltrated some of these groups on
Mhm.
social media.
Yeah.
And even though she crossed kind of an academic line, she actually went into ISIS chat rooms with her team and actually would then turn the data over to the FBI, and then they put her on like a hit list, like kind of like a fatwa issued against her that here's her address, here's where she teaches, please go and kill her, So she was at the conference I attended several years ago, but another reason lone wolves become more kind of relevant, because if you can be infiltrated by the state as part of a group, keeping yourself isolated, obviously means your likelihood of surviving, you're just not going to be tracked as well.
Yes, you think that?
Yeah, the Chinese citizens seem to be okay with the idea of being,
Yeah.
Surveilled by AI, as opposed, and getting safety.
Mhm.
How likely do you think this is going to happen in the American society in the next 50, 100 years? This is what
Mhm.
we're all afraid of, right?
Right,
The death
right.
of democracy.
Right, and I feel like America is much more conscious about our freedoms with China. It's not even necessarily that the citizens are okay with it, but they really don't have a choice because their government is so authoritarian and totalitarian, where in America, the people have a voice and the people obviously can speak up more. And it's just, in general, Americans are a lot more, I guess, stubborn sometimes for change, for lack of a better word. Yes, Mr. Posey.
Did you come across any instances of lone wolf anti-terrorists, like vigilantes that were successful in thwarting any sort of attack?
I didn't come across any lone vigilantes, but there's certainly government organizations and legislation that's out there to combat it. But
no private citizens.
I mean, there's obviously the neighborhood watch type stuff, but it's not really. I've never come across a lone vigilante like that.
What was the movie, Maya, that we watched lately, about the servicemen that was going to, what? Yeah, Stranger at the Gate. That were reminiscent because there were people in that community that were worried, and authorities. That's why they went after them. They later basically were like, okay, this guy's a serious threat, etc. That would have been interesting to have plugged this into the thesis because it has some connection there. But well, it was a military background too, the individual involvement. So yeah. Questions? All right, good job. All right, team, let's get up here. Come on. Committee, we'll go back to you. Yeah, okay. We'll get on this side and we'll, so they can see me. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, Marion gave me that book. I was like, here's a chess game.
She is actually very interesting. So let's get over here so you can see. Okay, so is this it? How we're doing it, Angela? We're trying not to, yeah. See,
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Angela's been doing it the same way.
Oh, is it, oh.
That way, got it, everyone?
All right, y'all look at me. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, now, here, okay. I'm getting all 5.
I get it.
Good. Now, come on. Yeah, okay. Yeah, where's the?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, listen, I'll talk to you in 1 minute. I'll fill you in on that other situation.
I mean, you want the? Yeah, Write your thesis about the map or. I like kind of. Oh, okay. Like the guy who, yeah.
I would go, but I just was on
You radicalized me, Aaron. Thank you.
You sound like very smart and like I was saying really well.
Aaron.
Yes.
Good job. Very good, very calm. Good. Good style. And you know, Maryland has, Maryland has such one of the largest databases for like extremism in the world.
The sources from Maryland, like UMD, it was like all that, the professors.
Yeah, they have this whole center, it's an interdisciplinary center there. So, yeah. One of the, I can't, someone mentioned it in their thesis defense, maybe it was actually asked. Oh, yeah. I've been there a lot because that's the World History Day, so we come to the national finals, I've been there probably 7 or 8 times. It is a very, 30, what's it, 32,000 square. It's large. Wow. It's a great location. You're close to Baltimore and DC. Yeah. Very easy. Easy to get to. Oh.
It's a long way away.
You got band tonight, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they may. You know, the countries don't use those. And I do think you have to seek out knowledge.
This guy wasn't right with your.
That's not. Really awesome.
Hey, I still wonderful early, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
Eric, you're so fucking wonderful. And then he started writing his picture.
The antibiotics and lemon goes for 2 weeks. Now, hopefully that one's the last that will clear up. It's stubborn, it's inside. It looks much like a complete.
Okay, I'm going home, I have 6,000. Well, not
I like how you leave out that as you were avoiding going to the doctor.
Yeah.
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 You have your practice now? I have it tomorrow too.
I have not done my eyes for that.
Neither have I. I'll do my practice.
Okay. Hopefully it'll clear up, but, yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much for appreciating
And I'll research for the tie on Amazon. Floyd? Yeah.
How are you?
it. Yeah, how are you?
Oh my gosh, what a